Róisín Shortall, please.
Taoiseach, I wish to raise the issue of the role of the head of the Office of Government Procurement in respect of the Children's Hospital. And I'd ask you just to respond to the issues I'm raising rather than, give a rationale for a new children's hospital. Nobody's denying the need for a new children's hospital, but there are important issues at stake here that we need answers to. So I want to raise that issue of the role of this person and the statements that both the Taoiseach and Minister Donoghue made on the record of this House. On Tuesday of last week, when asked if the head of the OGP alerted Minister Donoghue to the escalating cost overruns at the Children's Hospital, the Taoiseach replied, and I quote, "If somebody is on a board, his or her fiduciary and legal responsibilities are to that board, and the correct line of accountability is from the chairman of that board to the line minister, not individual board members acting on their own part." That's the end of a quote. We now know, of course, that that statement was not true. These constraints do not apply, as the board in question is not a company, it's a development board. So the Taoiseach needs to correct the record of the House, as what he said was simply untrue and misleading. I would ask you, Taoiseach, to convey those concerns to the Taoiseach and request that he does that at the earliest possible date. In respect of civil servants who are board members of non-commercial state bodies, we know Circular 12 of 2010 applies and is very clear. Where there is a significant public policy issue at stake or a disagreement within the board on a major public policy issue, the civil servant should request the chairman to notify the relevant minister, or failing that, notify the minister himself or herself. And under a protocol, the minister must be notified without delay where there are serious weaknesses in controls that have not been addressed despite being drawn to the attention of the board or the chairperson, or there is a serious, significant strategic or reputational risk to the state body that is not being addressed. Last evening, Minister Donoghue confirmed that Circular 12 of 2010 applied. He said, and I quote, "According to the circular, which the head of the OGP was subject to, it was his role to ensure that the parent department responsible for the project was being informed of what was happening," and he went on to say, "and that was happening." Now, either the official did what he was supposed to do and alerted the minister, or he didn't. Now, if he didn't adhere to the circular, that's a serious matter. If he did, I think it's important that we know exactly when he did inform the minister. Was that information provided without delay, as he was required to do? And can we have the detail of that? And can we also have information in relation to the actions of that official in respect of his own minister, Minister Donoghue? And presumably, if he was aware of this escalating problem within the Children's Hospital, he would have notified his own minister.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Yeah, Deputy, quite a lot of detailed questions there, but let me try to respond to them. First of all, Paul Quinn is the Government Chief Procurement Officer and Head of the Office of Government Procurement. Mr Quinn was appointed in a personal capacity to the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board in 2013. For a 5-year term by the then Minister for Health, Minister James Riley. He was reappointed in 2018 by the current Health Minister, Mr Harris. Members of the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board, in line with the Code of Practice for the Governance of State Bodies and the NPHDB's own Code of Governance, have a duty to the Board in the first instance, a responsibility to act collectively in decision-making and communication, and an obligation to observe its confidentiality arrangements. The Department of Health, as the accountable department, established reporting and governance arrangements for the project, through which the board provided, that's the Development Board, provided regular updates to it on the project. The Department of Health has already set out in detail those governance arrangements and the timeline of when the Development Board alerted it to the cost escalation and when the Department of Health subsequently communicated the new cost projections to Government and to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. So in other words, there were agreed codes in terms of communication, both on the development board for the hospital and also between that board and the accountable department, which is the Department of Health. And from my note and explanation here, those codes and that process was followed.
Shortall.
Well, thanks, Taoiseach. I'm actually quoting from the protocol now here, which requires an official who is appointed as a board member in a body such as this, that under that protocol, the Minister must be notified without delay where there are serious weaknesses in controls that have not been addressed. Now, it was quite apparent to anybody involved in the Children's Hospital that there were serious weaknesses in controls, and that was apparent from early 2018. So last night, Minister Donoghue told us that the official in question was doing what he was supposed to be doing, and he was notifying the department and the Minister. So when was he notifying the department of the Minister? When was he notifying the department and the Minister that this was the case? I mean, he's required to do it without delay. So maybe, we could have clarification on when exactly he was told, and whether or not, there was that other part, whether or not he notified his own Minister, Minister Donoghue in this case, given the responsibility of that Minister.
Deputy, to conclude, please.
No, Deputy, thank you for that. The point here is that he was on the board. He had a code of practice that he was governed by on that board. He was also accountable to the sponsoring department, which was the Department of Health. And there was a line of communication between the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board and the Department of Health. And he had an obligation to play his role in that as a board member. And as a board member that was accountable to the Department of Health. That was the line of communication. There wasn't a separate line to the Department of Public Expenditure, which wouldn't have been appropriate given the role of the Department of Health as the parent department for this project.